I need some kids. How's everybody doing today? Good. I'm thinking about lunch. How about you? Yeah, you're thinking about lunch too? If you could have anything for lunch today, what would it be? McDonald's? Okay. What about you guys? What do you want for lunch? You don't know? If you could have anything for lunch today, you don't know what you'd want? Well, I just got back from vacation. I had a lot of really good lunches over vacation. I had New Jersey pizza, which is the best. And I had, pork roll. You don't even know what that is. It's amazing. There's so many good things. I am so hungry. So will you take me to McDonald's with you? You have enough to share? You don't know? Well, you know, the story in the Bible today is all about sharing. Jesus had a bunch of people together. Now, this might be a bunch of people, but there were bunches of people. Like at least 50 times this many people. And they all came together, and Jesus turned to his disciples and said, "So, what are you going to feed them for supper?" What would you do if I said to you, "So what are you going to give us for lunch today?" What would be your response?
Feast.
What? Food? Okay. So are you guys going to get that ready for us so we can come down in a few minutes and have lunch? A feast? You want to make a feast? I love this optimism. You know, the fact of the matter is, if I asked some of these folks out here and said, "So what are we having for lunch today? Are you going to prepare it for us?" They'd look at me and they'd say, "Oh, but Robert, we're not ready to give them lunch. We don't have enough food here. There's not enough. Tell them to go home." Well, that's exactly what Jesus' disciples said. They said to Jesus, we can't do this. This is going to take all the money we have, plus all the money we would make in the next 6 months. We can't do this. But then something happened. A boy, off on the side somewhere, heard them talking about needing food to feed everybody. He had brought his bag lunch, some fish, some loaves of bread, and he said, "I'll share what I have." One of the disciples, I'm sure, kind of looked at him and kind of rolled his eyes and said, "Well, what's that going to do with all these people?" But he brought it to Jesus. Jesus accepted the boy's gift, and he blessed it, and he started passing it around. There were 5,000 people there that day. And guess what? Did everybody just get a little? Everybody got everything they wanted. And when they collected the leftovers, there was more left over than what they started with. How does that happen? Miracles. It's a miracle. Now, I don't know if the miracle was the fact that the food just kind of multiplied as it went around, or maybe the miracle was when everybody saw that young boy share what he had, they started sharing what they had. Either one would be kind of a miracle. But in the end, everybody had everything they wanted. They had enough. I think God gives us everything we need. Gives us everything that we need right here and right now. Oh, sure, sometimes we want more, or sometimes we want less of things that we don't like. But God provides. Let's remember that today when we have lunch. whether it's at McDonald's or a sandwich at home. Let's be thankful for the gifts that we have, and remember in our hearts those who may not be as blessed, and that we share in what we do have so that others will have enough too. Let's say a prayer together. Gracious God, thank you. Thank you for this awesome reminder of the plenty that you share with us. Help us to follow that example as we live our lives in this world. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Thanks for coming up. Jesus loves me, this I know, for the Bible tells me so. Little ones to him belong. They are weak, but he is strong. Yes, Jesus loves me. Yes, Jesus loves me. Yes, Jesus loves me. The Bible tells me so.
Good morning. Today's New Testament reading is from Ephesians chapter 3, verses 14 through 21. For this reason I bow my knees before the Father, from whom every family in heaven and on earth takes its name. I pray that, according to the riches of his glory, he may grant that you may be strengthened in your inner faith, in your inner being with power through his Spirit, and that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith, as you are being rooted and grounded in love. I pray that you may have power to comprehend with all the saints what is the breadth and length and height and depth, and to know the love of Christ that surpasses knowledge, so that you may be filled with all the fullness of God. Now to him who by the power at work within us is able to accomplish abundantly, far more than all we can ask or imagine, to him be the glory of the church, and in Christ to all generations forever and ever. Amen. Please stand as you are able for the reading of the gospel. Now let us listen for God's word of the gospel according to John, chapter 6, verses 1 through 21. After this, Jesus went to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, also called the Sea of Tiberias. A large crowd kept following him because they saw the signs that he was doing for the sick. Jesus went up to the mountain and sat down there with his disciples. Now the Passover, the festival of the Jews, was near. When he looked up and saw a large crowd coming toward him, Jesus said to Philip, "Where are we to buy bread for these people to eat?" He said this is to test him, for he himself knew what he was going to do. Philip answered him, 6 months' wages would not be enough bread for each of them to get a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, "There is a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. But what are they among so many people?" Jesus said, "Make the people sit down." Now there was a great deal of grass in the place, so they sat down, about 5,000 in all. Then Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to those who were seated, so also the fish, as much as they wanted. When they were satisfied, he told the disciples, "Gather up the fragments left over so that nothing may be lost." So they gathered them up, and from the fragments of the 5 barley loaves left by those who had eaten, they filled 12 baskets. When the people saw the sign that he had done, they began to say, "This is indeed the prophet who has come into the world." When Jesus realized that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, he withdrew again to the mountain by himself. When evening came, his disciples went down to the sea, got into a boat, and started across the sea to Capernaum. It was now dark, and Jesus had not yet come to them. The sea became rough because a strong wind was blowing. When they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus walking on the sea and coming near the boat, and they were terrified. But he said to them, "It is I, do not be afraid." Then they wanted to take him into the boat, and immediately the boat reached the land toward which they were going. This is the word of the Lord. You may be seated.
Let us pray. Lord, may the words from my mouth and the meditations of each of our hearts be acceptable and pleasing in your sight. O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. When is enough enough? We find ourselves in this interesting paradox where we are people that oftentimes want more of some things and less of other things, and rarely are we satisfied with what we have. I want you to think about that in your own lives this last week. Was there things that you had that you wish you had more of? Maybe some of those things you overindulged, like my shrimp marinara over linguine on vacation made by my aunt who is a real Italian. Oh my goodness. When is enough enough? When we have not been satisfied with the blessings and the bounty that we have received. You know, we find ourselves oftentimes in that place where we want more of the things that give us satisfaction, that give us joy. In fact, we want more of what gives us security and a sense of hope. And we try to store it away for later on when we might need it in a pinch. We gather in more of these things. And that's not bad, but what are we willing to do to get more? What are we willing to sacrifice so that enough isn't enough? Oh, the sacrifices may seem small at times, but those little bits of time that we steal away from those that we love, from the things that bring us joy, they begin to add up. Yes, and even those things that we may do that compromise our own sense of trueness, that may compromise our own morals and values, though they seem small, begin to add up. And we feel that weight and that heaviness. All in hopes of gathering something for another day. And there's probably some of us this last week that, well, quite frankly, had enough. We wish there wasn't quite so much on our plate, that we weren't as busy as we might have been, or we weren't as in pain or suffering or struggling as much as we might have. We might have had those who we love that were suffering, and we said, enough. If it is your will, take this from me. When is it that we can find ourselves in a place where we can balance and we can understand that what we have is what we are equipped to handle and what we have been given to share? This really is the crux of the story today when it comes to Jesus gathering in the midst of this 5,000 people. It starts off with Jesus and his disciples going up to the mountain together, but they'd heard about him. They heard about the amazing things he did with those who were sick. And they wanted more. They wanted more, so the crowds kept getting bigger and bigger, and they were following him wherever he would go. And as he saw the crowds begin to gather, he turns to Philip and he said, where are we going to buy bread for all these people? I love that question. You see, he already knew the answer. But he wanted to ask Philip. And I think sometimes when we are overwhelmed with the challenges that we have, it's kind of like God asking a question that God already knows the answer to. We need to articulate that question for ourselves. We need to be able to hear, like Philip did that day, where are we going to find the resources to be able to handle the challenge ahead? Philip, like many of us, sort of shrugged his shoulders and said, there's no way. That would take 6 months' worth of wages. We can't possibly have enough. Anybody feel like they don't have enough? Jesus then stands there, and there's this boy off to the side. And I love this picture of this boy overhearing the adults talking about not having enough. And as a child would often do, here's what I have. Here's what I can do. A few loaves of barley bread and a couple of fish. And something happened in that moment, and I don't want us to pass by this because oftentimes we jump right into the rest of the story, the miracle, because we like to get to the miracle. But something happened. Andrew, one of the disciples, was near that boy, and he heard him. He heard the boy. And he took that gift and he brought it to Jesus. Oh yes, somewhat doubting, somewhat not sure of what possibly a couple of loaves of bread and a couple of fish would do to meet the needs of so many. But he brought it to Jesus. And Jesus accepted that gift. Don't jump over that point. Because there may be young people that aren't part of the 12 that just happened to be there that day, maybe drugged along by their parents. Maybe curious about these things he had heard about how Jesus had healed the sick. We don't know why the boy was there, but we do know the boy was willing to share what he had. And even though it might have seemed insignificant, to reach the insurmountable challenge, Andrew listened and offered it up. Then we get to the miracle. Jesus blesses it and begins to pass it around. I love this particular passage because this is one of those passages where my heart of hearts as a youth pastor points to the young people helping us find the way. Offering what they have to an insurmountable problem, and it being exactly the answer they needed to solve the problem that was ahead of them. They began to pass it around, and like I had said in my children's sermon, I don't know if the miracle was that this food somehow miraculously began to multiply, or the miracle was that the young boys' generosity inspired everyone around them, and so they all began to share with one another to the point that there were 12 baskets left over. I also like this part too. Jesus says we need to collect what we haven't used. God doesn't make too much. God always makes the right amount, and sometimes there are leftovers, but it's because there is still opportunity for us to share Anybody have leftovers in their fridge? Anybody have leftovers that have been in the fridge too long? God does not give us more than what we can use. What a wonderful word of hope and inspiration for us. That in those times in which we think we want more, we are simply reminded that to those to whom much is given, much is expected, and we are called to take what we have in excess of what we need to make sure that someone else has what they need. And in those times in which we are empty, that we may fear that we do not have enough, fear not. There is plenty. It will be available. Now, I also like the part of the story that it is juxtapositioned to another story. We get the feeding of the 5,000, but then we hear these people want more. This miraculous feeding of the 5,000 wasn't enough. They want to make him king. After all, who wouldn't want Jesus as their king? Who wouldn't want to lift him up and make him in charge of everything? Make him responsible for our well-being, for our nation. Jesus went away by himself up to the mountaintop when he heard this was about to happen. They wanted more when he had already provided enough. The disciples went down to the sea and they got in the boat and they rowed 3 or 4 miles. The wind began to pick up. This is different from that other story about the wind whipping up on the sea. You know, don't you find it kind of interesting that the disciples had to learn this lesson over and over and over again? Right? Remember the time when Jesus was asleep in the bottom of the boat and the wind whipped up and they got all nervous and afraid? They woke him up and he said, "Peace, be still," and the wind died down. And we remember that time in which he was walking across the water and they got terrified. And then he called out to Peter to come. And Peter began to walk on the water, and then he began sinking, and he reached down and he lifted him up, and everything was okay. This is another story. This is another story in which he's walking on the water. And again they get afraid. Again they're filled with fear. And he says, "It is I, do not be afraid." And what is their response to that? "Oh, we want him in the boat with us." Does he get in the boat with them? What does the story say? No. They simply got to where they were going in that moment. And you know, there's something to that part of the story. There's something to that journey that each one of us are on. And today in particular, as we celebrate the journey that Greg has had with us as a church in youth ministry, as we send him forth on the rest of his journey where God continues to call and lead him. Sometimes we want Jesus in the boat with us. And we have to be willing to accept he's just going to get us there safely. It's going to get us to the other side of the sea. Do not be afraid. I love how these stories are all about when enough is enough. There is enough for everybody. You don't need more. My teaching, my example, my healing, my multiplying of food is enough. You don't need me as king. I will walk along beside you when the winds blow. Do not be afraid. It's enough. What challenges are we facing today in which we are afraid we don't have enough? And we need to hear those words. Do not be afraid. Now I want to be clear, because in the Ephesians passage, it also isn't just about what is comprehensible. In fact, it allows us to go one step further. It challenges us to go beyond the height and the depth and the breadth and the width that we can even imagine. To know God's love. In fact, it says, what is the breadth and the length and the height and the depth, and to know the love of God that surpasses knowledge. A little bit of an oxymoron. To know the love of God that surpasses knowledge. How can you know something that surpasses knowledge? We're given that opportunity to begin to try to get our heads and our hearts and our arms around that kind of love. And now to Him by whom the power at work within us is able to accomplish abundantly far more than we can ask for or even imagine. We've got a God that knows so much more, that gives so much more, that we can't even begin to get ourselves around that kind of opportunity. God has great things in store. When is enough enough? For God, enough is enough. Do not lose heart. Let's pray. Oh, gracious God, sometimes when we face the things ahead, the unknown, the fears, the challenges, the worries, the concern, whatever it is that you call or you are calling us to pass through, help us to remember enough is enough. You provide all that we need. And in fact, more than what we need to get through what this world challenges us to get through. Let us not lose heart. And Lord, as we prepare to send Greg forth on his journey, we just ask Him to surround him with the utmost blessing, that you have equipped him with what he needs, and you will continue to equip him with what he will need to do the work that you called him to do. And for that we give thanks. Amen.